The air in Washington, D.C. was crisp, with the first chill of fall settling into the city. The sun was dipping behind the tall buildings, casting long shadows on the streets as the evening rush began. But at a small, modest park near the White House, the usual noise of city life seemed miles away. Barron Trump, son of the former president, strolled quietly along the sidewalk, a rare moment of peace for a young man whose life had often been in the public eye. It had been weeks since he had been out in the city on his own, without security guards, without the constant barrage of reporters or flashing cameras. Tonight, he had managed to slip away from his usual entourage, hoping to have a simple moment of anonymity. As he walked past a bench, his eyes caught something unusual. A man, hunched over and raggedly dressed, sat on the bench, clutching a torn blanket. His shoes, once probably a fine pair, were now tattered and dirty. The man's face was weathered, his eyes hollow, as though he had lived years on the streets. Barron slowed his pace, unsure of what to do. The world he lived in often separated people like him from people like the man on the bench. But tonight, something felt different. Without thinking, Barron walked toward the man. He wasn't sure what compelled him to do so. Perhaps it was the kindness in the stranger's eyes, or maybe it was something deeper, an unspoken bond that only a few people could understand. Barron sat down beside the man, his heart racing. "Hey, are you okay?" Barron asked, his voice gentle but firm. The man looked up, clearly surprised. His eyes widened as he recognized Barron's face. You're Barron Trump, right?" Barron nodded, trying to ignore the sudden discomfort that came with being recognized. He didn't want any special treatment or to be treated differently because of who he was. "I'm fine," the man said gruffly, but there was something in his tone that betrayed his words. "Just tired. Been a long day." Barron didn't say anything for a moment. He glanced around, noting the exhaustion in the man's posture and the raggedness of his clothes. His gaze shifted to the park bench, and suddenly the weight of the moment hit him. A man who had everything. Him, with all his privilege, sitting next to a man who had nothing. It wasn't right. "Do you have somewhere to go?" Barron asked, his voice softening even more. The man shook his head. "No, not really. Just here for now." Barron looked at him with genuine concern. Then, something strange happened. Instead of standing up and walking away, Barron reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, simple envelope. "This is for you," Barron said, holding it out to the man. The man's eyes widened, and he hesitated for a moment before reaching out to take it. He carefully opened the envelope to find a crisp $100 bill. It wasn't much, but it was enough for a warm meal, perhaps even a place to stay for the night. Barron stood up, feeling a strange sense of fulfillment as he did. "Take care of yourself," he said, then turned to leave. As Barron walked away, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed inside him. It wasn't about the money, it was about something much deeper. He had given a gift, but in doing so, he had also received something in return, a sense of connection that transcended wealth, status, and fame. The next morning, the streets of Washington, D.C. were buzzing with the usual hustle and bustle. But in the small, quiet park where Barron had encountered the homeless man, something unexpected was happening. Word had spread like wildfire about the simple act of kindness Barron had shown. The homeless man, whose name turned out to be David, had shared the story with a few people he knew. It wasn't long before the small circle of people he confided in began talking, and then the story made its way onto social media. A few photos had been taken during the encounter, innocent snapshots that hadn't meant anything at the time, but would soon ignite a media frenzy. The internet, always hungry for stories, latched onto the image of Barron handing the envelope to David. The title of the post read, "Barron Trump's simple gift to a stranger goes viral for the best reason." By the time the sun had fully risen, the story was everywhere. News outlets picked it up, eager to share the heartwarming narrative. Social media influencers and bloggers were quick to latch onto the story, praising Barron for his unexpected act of generosity. Hashtags like kindness in action and Barron's gift were trending all over platforms like Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. But as the story grew, so did the scrutiny. Barron, who had grown accustomed to being under the public's eye, felt the familiar pressure of attention start to build. He had been careful in his life to avoid the spotlight, to stay out of the limelight, and to remain under the radar. Yet here he was, the subject of a viral story that was rapidly taking over the news cycle. A local reporter, Jane Miller, had picked up the story early and quickly published an article that painted Barron in a glowing light. But even Jane's positive spin couldn't keep the trolls and critics at bay. "It's a publicity stunt," one commenter wrote. "What's the point of giving $100 to a homeless guy if you're just going to make it public? It's all about the attention." Others questioned Barron's intentions. What does he expect in return? Does he want a medal for giving someone money? The backlash grew, and soon it wasn't just the anonymous online trolls that were speaking out, it was members of the political community as well. Barron's critics, especially those who had always viewed the Trump family through a lens of suspicion, pounced on the story. "Typical Trump behavior," one prominent political pundit declared on a popular talk show. "A rich kid trying to buy himself some good press with the smallest gesture. It's pathetic." Despite the negativity, a wave of support began to surge in the other direction. People who had read about Barron's gift began sharing their own stories of kindness, all echoing the same sentiment. It wasn't about the amount of money or the recognition, it was about the simple act of reaching out to another human being. "Not everyone in that family is bad," one Twitter user wrote. "Maybe Barron has a heart after all." Soon, Barron's act of kindness became a symbol. People began posting about their own random acts of kindness, inspired by his gesture. Stories flooded social media of people paying for the person behind them in line at coffee shops, leaving food out for the hungry, or simply lending a listening ear to those in need. The viral story had sparked a movement, and what started as a quiet moment in the park had transformed into something much bigger. Even David, the homeless man, had become something of a hero in his own right. He'd been interviewed by local news stations, sharing his own perspective on the event. His words resonated deeply with people. "I've been on the streets for a long time," David said, his voice cracking with emotion. "People look at you like you're invisible. But Barron, he didn't look at me like that. He saw me as a person. That's a rare thing." In the midst of all this, Barron found himself wrestling with his own feelings. He hadn't expected any of this. He had simply wanted to help a stranger. But now, as the story became more than just a moment of kindness, Barron had to confront the conflict inside him. Was the attention worth the gesture? Was the media frenzy turning something pure into something else? But deep down, Barron knew he had made the right choice. Even if the world didn't understand his actions, he knew the truth. He had helped someone. And that meant more to him than any viral fame. As the days passed, the story of Barron's simple act of kindness continued to ripple through the media. At first, the viral narrative was a heartwarming one, but soon things began to take an unexpected turn. The media frenzy wasn't the only thing Barron had to deal with. People started reaching out to him in ways he hadn't anticipated. It all started when a group of young entrepreneurs reached out with an idea. They were part of a non-profit organization focused on helping homeless people, and they wanted Barron to become their spokesperson. They believed that the story of his encounter with David could help bring attention to their cause and raise funds for their efforts. Barron's immediate instinct was to decline. He wasn't comfortable with the idea of using his family's name to promote something, no matter how worthy. But the more he thought about it, the more conflicted he became. He realized that if his name could bring attention to an issue he cared about, maybe it was worth considering. Still, he wasn't sure if he was ready for the weight of becoming the face of something so important, especially when he was just starting to find his own way. Meanwhile, David's newfound fame also took a surprising turn. People who had once ignored him on the streets now sought him out for interviews, photographs, and even charity events. He was invited to speak at panels about homelessness, his story inspiring thousands of people who saw him not just as a man down on his luck, but as a symbol of perseverance and hope. David's life had been turned upside down, and as grateful as he was for the attention and the opportunities it brought, he struggled to reconcile the spotlight with his desire for peace and anonymity. Through all this, Barron and David remained in contact. Barron had checked in on him a few times after their encounter in the park, making sure he was okay, offering small gestures of support when he could. But as the world looked at them both in a new light, Barron began to feel a pressure building within himself. Could he live up to this newfound role? Could he continue being the person who inspired change, or would he lose himself in the chaos? One afternoon, Barron decided to visit David again, wanting to talk things through. He found him sitting on the same bench in the park where they had first met. David's face lit up when he saw Barron approaching. "You're back," David said, his voice filled with a mix of surprise and gratitude. Barron smiled and sat down beside him. "Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about all this," he said, motioning to the phone in his hand, which was flooded with notifications. "I didn't expect any of this to happen. I just wanted to do something good for someone, you know?" David nodded. "I know exactly what you mean. When I woke up that morning, I didn't expect to be talking to reporters or getting calls from organizations. I just wanted to get through the day like every other one. But now, everything's different." The two sat in silence for a few moments, the weight of their shared experience hanging in the air between them. Finally, Barron spoke again. "I've been offered a chance to work with some charities," he said. "People want me to get involved, but I don't know if I'm doing it for the right reasons. I didn't do what I did for publicity. I did it because I wanted to help, but now everything's getting complicated." David looked at him thoughtfully. "You can't control how others see it. You can only control what you do. What matters is that you took the time to notice me, to give me something when no one else did. That's what counts." Barron paused, letting the words sink in. "I guess you're right. It just feels like it's spinning out of my control." David gave a small chuckle. "The world's always going to spin. You just have to decide whether you want to ride the ride or get off. You've already done something good. Don't let the rest mess with your head." Barron smiled. It wasn't the answer he had been expecting, but it was the one he needed to hear. As they spoke, Barron realized something profound. His act of kindness wasn't about the world's reaction. It wasn't about whether people understood or praised him. It was about the human connection that had occurred between him and David, the ripple effect it had created, and the possibility of using his platform to continue helping in a way that felt true to himself. As the conversation came to a close, Barron stood up to leave, his thoughts clearer than before. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew that he couldn't let the noise of the world dictate his actions. The choice was his, to either continue down this path of self-discovery and growth, or to retreat into the comfort of a quieter life. And so, Barron Trump made a decision. The days that followed were filled with decisions, both big and small. Barron decided to take a step back from the chaos of media appearances and viral stories. He knew he couldn't escape the public eye entirely, but he could control how he chose to engage with it. Rather than using his name for grand gestures or flashy headlines, he resolved to focus on quietly helping those in need, staying true to the intentions behind his first act of kindness. It wasn't long before Barron's new approach began to shift the narrative. The viral story, once just about a moment of kindness, started to take on a life of its own, one that was about more than just him or David. People were beginning to take notice of a movement emerging from that one simple act, the movement of kindness. Social media platforms continued to buzz, but now the conversation had evolved. Instead of focusing solely on Barron, it became about what others were doing to make a difference. Barron's gift was no longer just about Barron's viral moment. It had become a call to action for people to share their own stories of kindness. One by one, strangers began sharing their own experiences. There were the stories of people giving up their subway seats for the elderly, donating time at local shelters, or paying for a struggling single parent's groceries. It wasn't just about money. It was about the small, meaningful gestures that brought people together, even if only for a fleeting moment. Barron's quiet support for the homeless community also grew, though he remained out of the spotlight. He worked with several local organizations, providing funding and resources without fanfare. His involvement wasn't about being the face of the cause, it was about making a real, tangible difference. He had learned, after all, that sometimes the most powerful impact came from the quietest efforts. And then, just as Barron was beginning to find peace in this quieter, more personal approach to helping others, David, his original inspiration, made an unexpected move. He had received multiple job offers, housing assistance, and even opportunities to start his own nonprofit. But David didn't want any of that. Instead, he wanted to take a more direct approach to making change. One afternoon, David called Barron with an idea. "I've been thinking about something," David said, his voice a mixture of excitement and nervousness. "What if we started something together? Not just about me or you, but about the people who need a hand. We could create a foundation, something that helps those like me, who are out here trying to survive, but don't have anyone else to turn to." Barron felt a spark of inspiration. The idea made sense. Why not build a platform that focused on real, grassroots efforts to help the homeless and marginalized communities? With his resources and David's lived experience, they could create something that could truly change lives. "I'm in," Barron replied without hesitation. "Let's make it happen." And so, the Simple Gift Foundation was born. It wasn't about high-profile events or glossy advertisements. It was about direct, hands-on action. The foundation focused on providing immediate needs for homeless individuals: food, shelter, job training, mental health support, and a sense of community. But more than that, the foundation's core mission was to shift the narrative on homelessness, moving beyond stereotypes and showing the world that every person, no matter their situation, deserved dignity, respect, and a second chance. Barron and David worked tirelessly, meeting with community leaders, local businesses, and volunteers who were eager to make a difference. What started as a small idea between two unlikely friends turned into a nationwide movement. The media, initially skeptical of Barron's motivations, soon caught wind of the foundation's success. But this time, the focus was on the impact of their work, not the personalities behind it. Interviews with people whose lives had been changed by the foundation flooded the news cycle. The stories of people who had found jobs, rebuilt their lives, and discovered hope once again became the heart of the narrative. And David? His transformation was nothing short of extraordinary. The man who had once been homeless and overlooked was now standing on stages, speaking to large crowds about his journey. His voice was powerful, not just because of the hardships he had endured, but because of the message of resilience and compassion he carried with him. David had become the voice of the very cause that had given him a second chance, and his influence grew by the day. As the Simple Gift Foundation expanded, Barron found himself more fulfilled than ever. He wasn't just the son of a former president, He was now a man who had used his privilege to create real change. His legacy, he realized, wasn't going to be defined by his family's name or his public persona. It would be defined by the lives he had touched, the connections he had made, and the movement he had helped spark. For Barron, the true gift had always been the opportunity to make a difference, even in the smallest of ways. And now, that gift had rippled out across the country, creating a wave of kindness that was impossible to ignore. As the Simple Gift Foundation grew, Barron and David found themselves in unexpected positions, leaders of a movement they never could have predicted. They weren't just raising funds or giving speeches anymore. They were meeting with lawmakers, rallying for policy changes, and advocating for those who had long been ignored. The foundation's success wasn't just about helping people in crisis. It was about changing how society viewed them. And, as it turned out, Barron's viral moment had ignited something far greater than he or anyone could have anticipated. What had started as a small, unassuming act of kindness was now the cornerstone of a nationwide conversation about empathy, responsibility, and community. At first, it had been about Barron's encounter with David in the park, but now the story had evolved into one of collective action. Across the country, small acts of kindness, inspired by the foundation, were taking place. Schools held simple gift days, encouraging children to volunteer and give back to their communities. Businesses began donating a portion of their earnings to the foundation, and everywhere Barron went, people recognized him, not as a member of the Trump family, but as someone who had sparked a social movement. David, now working full-time with the foundation, found himself becoming a spokesperson for the cause. The man who had once been a homeless stranger had become a symbol of resilience. He spoke on talk shows, at conferences, and even before Congress, advocating for the homeless in a way that resonated with people from all walks of life. Barron, while not as comfortable in the spotlight, couldn't deny the profound impact he was having. He knew he couldn't continue to hide in the background. As he made public appearances and partnered with influential figures in philanthropy, it became clear that his involvement was pivotal to the success of the foundation. But he remained focused on the mission, choosing to keep his personal life separate from the work he was doing. However, not everyone was thrilled with the direction Barron had chosen. There were still critics who felt he was only getting involved to improve his public image or gain political favor. The internet was full of trolls, skeptics, and conspiracy theorists who tried to undermine the foundation's success. But Barron didn't let it faze him. He had learned early on that, in the world of social media and public perception, people were going to believe what they wanted to believe. What mattered most was the tangible change that was happening every day, change that couldn't be dismissed by a few negative voices. A turning point came when the foundation launched a new initiative, a partnership with shelters and rehabilitation centers to provide long-term solutions for homeless individuals. They introduced a program called The Path to Tomorrow, which helped people transition from homelessness into stable housing, providing not just a place to live, but also job training, counseling, and financial education. The program became a model for how communities could sustainably address homelessness without simply offering temporary fixes. Barron was invited to speak at a high-profile event where the program would be showcased to potential investors and donors. The event was televised, and Barron's speech was poised to be the cornerstone of the evening. Despite the nerves that tingled through him, Barron was determined to get the message across. He had learned a lot over the past months, and now he was ready to speak from the heart. When it was his turn, Barron stood before the microphone, looking out at the crowd of influential business leaders, philanthropists, and activists. For a moment, the weight of it all hung heavy in the air. But then Barron spoke, his voice calm but steady. When I met David, I didn't expect my life to change. I didn't expect to be here today, talking to all of you about homelessness. "I didn't expect to be part of something this important," he began. But that's the beauty of kindness. It doesn't have an agenda. It doesn't need to be planned or orchestrated. It just happens. And from that one simple moment, we've built something that's already making a difference. Barron paused, his eyes scanning the room. He felt a quiet sense of pride as he saw the nods of agreement from the audience. The Simple Gift Foundation isn't just about giving money or supplies. It's about offering people dignity, respect, and the chance to rebuild their lives. We're here to offer a path forward, a path that leads to tomorrow. And if each of us takes just one small step, together, we can create a world where no one has to sleep on the streets, where no one has to feel forgotten. The room was silent for a moment, then erupted into applause. Barron stood there, taking it all in, but deep down he knew that this wasn't about the applause. It was about the people who would benefit from this initiative. It was about the future. That night, donations poured in from people all over the country. The Path to Tomorrow program gained momentum, and more shelters began adopting its model. Barron had found his purpose, and it was much greater than anything he could have imagined. As he and David left the event that evening, Barron turned to his friend with a smile. "You were right," Barron said. "It wasn't about the spotlight. It was about the people we could help." David grinned back. Sometimes the smallest gifts make the biggest difference. Months passed, and the Simple Gift Foundation continued to grow at an incredible rate. Barron and David's efforts were becoming legendary, not just for the scale of the movement, but for its heart. What had once been a viral moment on social media had become a lasting symbol of kindness, compassion, and action. The media, which had once been skeptical of Barron's motives, now praised him as an example of what young leaders could accomplish when they used their platform for good. But Barron, despite the praise, remained grounded. He knew that the true measure of success wouldn't be found in headlines or accolades. It would be found in the lives that were changed. In the following year, Barron was invited to speak at a major international summit on homelessness. It was a moment that cemented his place as not just a philanthropist, but a true advocate for the marginalized. The summit, attended by leaders from around the globe, gave Barron the opportunity to share the foundation's vision on a larger stage. But this time, Barron wasn't standing alone. David, now a recognized public speaker and advocate for the homeless, stood by Barron's side, offering his story as a living testament to what the foundation had accomplished. Their partnership had become the foundation's most powerful message. Two men from entirely different walks of life, brought together by one simple act of kindness, could make an extraordinary difference. When it was Barron's turn to speak, the audience fell silent. Barron had a way of commanding attention without ever trying to dominate a room. He spoke simply, without flair or exaggeration, yet his words resonated deeply. "It's easy to ignore problems when they don't directly affect us," Barron began, "but every single person we meet, whether they're sitting on the corner or walking through the doors of a shelter, has a story. They've loved, they've lost, and they've dreamed. And sometimes, all they need is someone to believe that they can start again." The room was silent for a long moment before a wave of applause swept through. Barron didn't smile, he simply nodded in acknowledgement. His mission had never been about the applause. It had always been about creating a legacy of compassion. Back in the United States, the Simple Gift Foundation had evolved into a nationwide force for change. Every year, the foundation held a Gift Week, a national event where volunteers worked in tandem with shelters, businesses, and individuals to offer food, clothing, job opportunities, and mentorship to the homeless. The campaign was a huge success, drawing attention to the root causes of homelessness and urging society to shift its focus from charity to systemic change. David's life had transformed completely. He had gone from struggling to survive on the streets to becoming a national symbol of hope. With Barron's support, David started his own outreach program within the foundation, helping those who were newly homeless to find stability. He often spoke to youth groups, sharing his story and reminding them that anyone could fall on hard times, but no one had to stay there forever. For Barron, however, the most fulfilling part of the journey was seeing the ripple effect of kindness continue to spread. He began to hear stories of people who had been inspired by his viral moment. Stories of individuals who had helped their neighbors, mentored young people, or taken action to address homelessness in their own communities. Barron realized that the legacy of that one simple gift wasn't just about the foundation, it was about the way people had started to think differently about how they treated each other. It was David who brought Barron full circle one evening as they sat together in the park where it all began. "You know," David said with a grin, "I never could have imagined all of this happening when I met you that day. It's funny how one small act of kindness can snowball into something that changes the world." Barron smiled softly. "I didn't know either. But I guess that's the thing with kindness. It doesn't always need to be planned. You just have to be open to it when it comes." David nodded. "And now look at us, helping people get back on their feet, giving them a second chance. You've changed my life, Barron." Barron didn't respond right away. He was lost in thought, reflecting on the incredible journey that had led them here. He knew that their work wasn't done, not by a long shot. There was still so much to do, so many lives to touch. But in that moment, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Barron had discovered his true calling, not as a public figure, but as a man who used his resources, his privilege, and his influence to bring light into the lives of others. He had learned that the most profound impact came not from grand gestures, but from the simplest acts of kindness, shared quietly, with no expectation of recognition. The story of Barron Trump's simple gift to a stranger had come full circle. What had started as one moment of kindness had turned into a movement that had transformed the way people saw each other and the way they cared for one another. And as Barron looked toward the future, he knew that the ripples of kindness he had set in motion would continue to spread, leaving a legacy that would endure for generations to come.